So good afternoon, ladies, and thank you to Sabancı University for this wonderful opportunity to come again to Turkey. So I came first to your wonderful country in 1992, 25 years ago, when on the occasion I spent 5 weeks touring all of Turkey. Unfortunately not Trabzon and Black Sea and not Lake Van, but pretty much everywhere else, driving across country. And then subsequently, through my career in telecommunications, I have had the opportunity to be in Turkey, mostly dealing with telecoms companies in the subsequent period. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and the progress that is made in Istanbul with the infrastructure and all of the investments that is made on the physical side is only a testimony to what you can do with the human capital in the country once you get the 50% of women fully engaged in the economy. So my remarks today will be an overview of the status quo on corporate governance and gender diversity in Europe. So we will go forward. And so effectively, what I want to illustrate for you today is where we are, what's the goal, and how we're going to get to the goal. Now, there's a lot of discussion about, what is the right percentage. And when we started with the GDRW project, with Vivian Redding and with representation of the European business schools, we were literally sitting around having coffee. There were 12 ladies, and we were deciding, what would be the criteria that we would be looking for in order to have women qualified to join the GDRW list. And one of our colleagues, she said, why are we wasting our time talking about all these percentages? It's just parity, okay? And I thought to myself, wow, that's so clear and so evident, and yet we don't talk about it enough. So it's nice to talk about percentages, but it's better to talk about parity, because parity is what we live in society. And for that reason, I looked long and hard to find an image of parity in corporate governance in Europe, and sadly, I could not find one. So the only image I could find of true parity so far was this photo taken at the Christmas celebration of the Icelandic government in 2011, when, sadly, this government is no longer in power, but for the first time, the Icelandic people elected government with full parity, and the first time that they had a finance minister who was a woman. And this was an important milestone for gender equality in Iceland. Interestingly, it was also a protest vote, or a realization or a reaction against the largest corporate debacle that had taken place in Iceland, which the country lost huge amounts of value, and huge amounts of public and private funds were absconded by mostly male entrepreneurs and fraudsters. So the whole question of parity should naturally be obvious, but we might need just to remember that, as has been stated in the Sabancı study, as well as by the guest speaker and by Vivian Redding, it's obvious that corporates need talent, and they need to have access to the maximum amount of talent they can find it. What we are also discovering in Europe is that it is a question that the millennial children, so the boys in society today, are finding this as normal, because the millennial children have grandmas who went to university, they have mummies who work, and their sisters are doctors and engineers and lawyers and teachers and whatever else. So our society is moving towards this direction where this question of parity will become, in fact, a natural reflection. In addition, what we find now in Europe is that for the politicians, gender diversity is a vote winner. And so one of the things you may not appreciate, but it's important to mention, Viviane Reding is a special European politician. You know, in Europe we have sometimes a disconnect between what happens in Brussels. I'm living in Brussels for the past 12 years, and you have all the European institutions. And next to that, you have what happens in the countries, in the member states. And Europe in Brussels is sometimes moving or running a little bit too fast ahead, or a little bit separating what goes on in the country. Not Viviane. Viviane has an exceptional ability to connect with the base. And so her big claim to fame was to cut roaming charges in Europe, to make phone calls cheaper for citizens. And now she is on this gender diversity, and the reason she's doing it is that it wins votes. Politicians like to do things that win votes, and gender diversity wins votes. And we will have a very interesting test of this in the coming year, because 2015 will be a watershed election year in Europe, and we are going to see how this actually comes through as a vote winner. And then obviously we have plenty of testimony as to the improved financial returns. Now, every initiative needs some faces, and in Europe, these three ladies are the queens of gender diversity. So we have Viviane Reding on the left. She is the Vice President of the European Commission and the Commissioner who has tabled the legislative initiative. We have Christine Lagarde, who in her period as Finance Minister of France was elected the best Finance Minister in Europe, and interestingly has gone to the IMF to replace an absolutely disgraced politician, Mr. Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who, thank goodness, did not become President of France. I do not have to be politically correct because I don't represent any specific platform. And we know that Angela Merkel has done a wonderful job in Germany, continues to be effectively the Queen of Europe, in spite of the fact that on the domestic platform, and I will revert to this later, there is still some tensions in Germany coming up to the State of the Union. Now, specifically, what exactly happens in Europe? What happens in Europe is, for legislative initiatives, the European Commission, which is comprised of one commissioner per country, brings forward a proposal for European legislation. That proposal is then submitted to the Parliament. In the European Parliament, we have 735 elected members. This is a very, very large parliament. And the Parliament has to approve the project coming from the Commissioner. So we had a very nice celebration, 1 month exactly to today. So on the 14th of October, the two key committees in the European Parliament voted strongly in favor of this initiative. Now, that is not yet enough, because once that legislative initiative is approved by the Parliament, it then has to go to the European Council, and the European Council is comprised of the 28 heads of the member states. Those heads of member states need to approve the initiative, and then it must go back into each one of the member states in a process referred to as transposition. And then it has to be effectively implemented in the countries. So, again, in researching my talk for you today, one of the messages that was, I think, very important was the message of vigilance, okay? Because it's not enough for us to get this wonderful law and this great legislation in place. This legislation has to live and breathe and be in societal values and in our day-to-day lives. And this is a huge undertaking still ahead of us. So give credit where credit is due. These are the members of the the committee that approved the proposal, and I will name them properly. So Mr. Michael Gustafsson, who is a Swedish Member of Parliament from the United Left and Nordic Green Left. He's a Swedish citizen born in 1966. Underneath him is his vice chairman, Livia Jaroka, who is a young Hungarian lady. She is born in 1974. Next to Madame Jaroka is Edith Estrela, the blonde lady at the bottom there. She is a Portuguese socialist, born in 1949. Then we have above in the center Elizabeth Morin-Chartier, who is a Christian Democrat from France, born in 1947. And on her left, we have Barbara Matera, who is an Italian member of the European People's Party. And she is also, I think, born in 1976. So we have a broad representation, and as you can also see, the FEM committee, as it's referred to, is a very large committee with 36 members. It's one of the largest committees in the European Parliament. So the fact that these committees have supported this initiative is a very strong message to the market. Now, as I said, we're on our way to getting to parity, but we're still pretty far away, to be honest, because one thing is to get the law and then to get the law implemented. Now, on the positive side, we have the targets. On the positive side, we start to have the talent pipeline, but there's a difference between a talent pipeline and an experience-based pipeline. And I think the ladies who are engaged in this will recognize that this can be a bit of a tension with the nomination committees to say, not can she do it, but has she done it? Okay? And in your careers, all of you will have experienced this in your career, that it's not the question, has she done it, but can she do it, that in the current climate we need to have accepted. So some of the barriers that do still exist and will continue to exist is that the alpha male role model, the image that I recruit someone who I feel comfortable with and who looks or acts like me, is still there. As we mentioned, the nomination committees saying, but there are not enough women. They're just, where am I going to find these women? Which is why we have created the GBRW list. And the GBRW list now with 8,000 ladies on the list starts to be consequent in the context of the candidates we're looking for. However, also, we still face, and will continue to face, too few women accountants, engineers, and scientists, because for many of the company boards, these are the profiles or the backgrounds that are the criteria they're looking for in their nominations. So now, the next part of the presentation, I'm going to take you a little bit of a tour around Europe and how things are progressing vis-a-vis the regulations, and then what really is happening in the companies. Now, I apologize because I did do a bit of an update that had some more images, and I hope that this version has the picture of Madame Sibanchi, because I did the effort to do so. But in Germany, first of all, so in Germany, we have Angela Merkel. She is the image of Germany around the world, a woman physicist from Eastern Germany, who is, probably the most competent national leader in Europe. But in Germany, in German society, women's engagement in corporate life is still woefully low. And women in German society who work and leave their children at the creche or leave their children with a third-party person to take care of them during the day are referred to as Ravensmutter, which is a raven mother. And if you know your ornithology, you know that ravens abandon their children. They have the babies, they leave them, they go off and do whatever they want somewhere else. So, and this is still living in newspapers, TV, radio in Germany, that if you're a professional woman and you have a nanny to take care of your kids full-time while you're earning the dough, then you are not a good mother, And this is something that in other countries we have moved on, particularly in France. So Germany has come up with a regulatory initiative under the Corporate Governance Code that they would like companies to comply or explain. Now this is a very interesting proposal because it's worded in such a neutral way that they ask the board to take diversity into account, which means that the chairman can say, yes, diversity needs to exist. He should have concrete objectives. Okay, I can say that I should have X%. I should take an appropriate consideration of candidates for these openings, and I should seek to have an appropriate number. Now, this comply or explain regulation went into effect in May 2010, so 3 years ago, and let's see where we are with the largest company in Germany, Siemens. Okay. Now, apologies, as I said, I did have another version with Madame Savanchi in the photo, but Siemens, being the largest industrial group in Germany, currently has a supervisory board with 5 out of 20 being women, and an executive committee, which, unfortunately, since I drafted this slide, and today, is now 0 out of 9. 0 out of 9. Okay. This is a company that has had 2 women on the executive committee, Madame Barbara Cooks and Madame Bridget Ederer. Madame Barbara Cooks has been the Chief Procurement Officer and the Chief Sustainability Officer of the company. She's leaving this month at the end of her contract. And Madame Bridget Ederer, who was head of Human Resources for the entire group, has already left. Now, Siemens has gone through a big corporate governance shift because the chairman, the CEO of Siemens, Mr. Loscher, was rather unceremoniously kicked out of the company for disappointing results, and he has been replaced by Mr. Joe Kaiser, who is the former CFO, and Mr. Kaiser has not sought to replace these 2 ladies in his executive committee, which is a big disappointment and has been very widely remarked in the press, international press, as well as the domestic press in Germany. But so, in spite of a nice comply and explain already 3 years ago, biggest corporation in Germany is not living up to where it should be. Now, we had, I'll come back to this because I had, oops, no, okay. In contrast to that, the largest telecommunications company, because my career is in telecommunications, the largest telecommunications company in Germany actually has a pretty good record with 7 out of 20 members of its board being women and 2 out of 7 of its executive committee being women, and we will come to them a little later. When we look at France, we see that France is a country where quotas seem to be working. So France, with the CAC 40, as the 40 largest corporate publicly quoted companies in France, have seen an increase of 3 percentage points up to 25% of women board directors in the course of 2012. And the new law has been passed to target to 40% by 2017. But then I said, well, let's look at a product and a company that is pretty much focused on women. So put up your hand if you use L'Oreal products. And sometime, yeah, maybe you use Schwarzkopf or something else, but you know, I use L'Oreal all the time. And here we are with L'Oreal. Now, L'Oreal is a bit of a special case because it is a company that has a large family stake. It has a large strategic shareholder being Nestle, but it's one of the largest publicly quoted companies in France. And in terms of number of corporate directors, we've got 4 out of 14. And in the executive committee, the photo that you have here is the executive committee with 12 suited men and only 3 suited women, which I was really pretty amazed by. It was fascinating doing the research for this speech because I learned a lot more about corporate governance than I did before. And even someone like me, I'm active in it all the time. So in contrast, Avon is at 6 on 10 with their board of directors. And this in spite of the fact that Avon has had a bit of a mixed experience with a lady CEO who was also asked to leave after a big debacle in the company's results. So now we go to the next. So now looking at Spain. So Spain is a country in Europe that has pretty exceptional experience in terms of gender diversity in public life. The current government has really brought in a raft of women into the cabinet, including at the time of her nomination, a pregnant lady defense minister, which, as an image in Spain, because I don't know if anybody speaks Spanish in the room, but embarazada is how you say to be pregnant in Spanish, embarazada. And you have this amazing image of this very peppy pregnant Minister of Defense doing the reviews of the honor guard of the Spanish military. So the Spaniards have put a legislative quota of 40%, so they've gone to the high level, and it's targeted at publicly traded companies with more than 250 employees. And this was passed in 2007. Okay, so 2007, that's already 6 years ago. Now, one of the big discussions about the quota and about the change is it's true that it takes time to change the composition of boards of directors because many people have, you have a long mandate, typically 3, 4, or even 5 years, and many times people have multiple mandates, so you don't have people disappearing in a short time frame. But 6 years on from 2007, let's see what's going on with one of the largest. So one of the largest publicly quoted companies in Spain happens to be in my sector in telecommunications. The company is Telefónica. Telefónica has a board of directors of 18 members with 1 woman. Out of the 18 board of directors, you have an executive commission who are responsible for running the company. And there are no women in that executive commission. And this in spite of the fact that in the annual report of the company, it's quoted very properly that the company has an effective and operational corporate governance, which is based on the global scale of Telefónica. In the context of the company's commitment to its shareholders, the board of directors, with the support of its committees, carries out its work in accordance with corporate governance standards, which are contained principally in its articles of association, the regulations of the general shareholders meeting, and the regulations of the board of directors. So that means 6 years on from when the legislation has been passed, that the largest quoted company in Spain has not adapted any of their articles of association, their regulations of the general shareholders meeting, or the regulations of the board of directors, which is really not good enough. And so, big congratulations to Eva Castillo-Sanz, because she's the lone woman in this huge organization who is holding up the flag and working very hard, I'm sure, while she's doing it. Wrong side. There we go. Now, coming from Belgium, I have to give you a little bit of an evidence of what's going on in Belgium. So Belgium has gone to quota. It's gone to quota at a lower level of only 33%. And it has done so with very specific and rather, in my own view, overly prescriptive rules. So you have 3 different categories, and the categories are defined very specifically. State-owned enterprises. Actually, in Belgium, the state-owned enterprises are already pretty much, not yet at parity, but they're at good compliance with the target. But that is more of a reflection that state-owned enterprise nomination procedure in Belgium is extremely politicized and leading not always to very effective corporate governance, but it does have gender diversity. with respect to publicly traded and small publicly traded companies. As you will see, the time horizon for compliance here is quite a long way out, given that the law passed in 2011. So small publicly traded companies, which is the bulk of the traded companies in Belgium, they will have 9 years to get their act together. But also, I thought it was interesting to see that in terms of sanctions, and there were very few countries that did have sanctions, here the company gets a post-compliance date if the board comprises fewer than the minimum number of each gender. Any newly appointed or reappointed director of the majority gender is void, so that's actually voiding a nomination, which is a pretty extreme measure. And the company will be allowed a 1-year grace period before the compensation and benefits of the board members is suspended until they become compliant. So that's actually hitting pretty directly, because that means the board members will not get their pay, they will not get their board fees if they're not compliant and they don't get their act together at least 1 year after the deadline. So, now, in spite of all of this, you know, when I say how far away are we, we're still pretty far. We are still pretty far because, interestingly, it wasn't until the whole question of getting women on boards really started to come through that all of a sudden this whole industry of what it takes to be qualified to be a non-executive director actually came into being. So here I will give a little bit of an anecdote. So myself, I sort of started with the idea that I would like to be on boards already in 1996. And in 1996, I was working in a technical institute for telecommunications, where I had run for an election that nobody, including myself, thought I would win. But I did, and I was happy that I did. And then I decided, well, maybe it would be good to start on this track of becoming, quote unquote, you know, I need some competence in the non-executive role. And at that time, the Institute of Directors in the United Kingdom had only just started their corporate director program. And now, in the UK, and indeed in every European country, you have just a proliferation of programs for people to be competent and qualified to come onto a board. And I think it is, we have to be, again, going back to my opening remarks of vigilance, we have to be vigilant with respect to this, because I think we risk sort of over sophistication in this domain, because there are many women, as we know from our list, who are competent, and once you've done, you know, what you've done in your career, the fact you have to then go and get some certificate to say you're a qualified non-executive director starts to become a little bit extreme. The other thing that we have to be concerned and aware of is that, at least in old Europe, the baby boomer demographic is coming through. So in the 50-plus cohort, there are many, many people looking for board directorships. It's just a demographic phenomenon. And now the guys are starting to have to hunt for mandates, and not all of them are very happy about this evolution. And so that's also where the whole question of the informal networks come back into effect, and it's important that the recruitment process is transparent and is open. And then, of course, the obvious thing is, as was mentioned by one of the Norwegian ladies, she said, well, in Norway, I don't know what the big debate is about, because being a non-executive director is a perfect job for women. You're underpaid, you have no guaranteed employment, and you have no benefits, you have no pension. So it's really just like being a woman in any other kind of job. And so also that, in my experience looking around, I see that the most lucrative mandates, which are in the private equity controlled companies, are still very much dominated by alpha males. So how do we move towards our objective? And here, I think we have three elements: hard data, persuasion, and the pipeline. And so, congratulations again to Savanchi University, because the beautiful brochure that you have picked up on your way in, the hard data, the factual studies are absolutely necessary in order to illustrate to those persons in positions of decision-making that this is a necessary and a natural reflection of our society. And for that, I also mentioned the wage disparity study, which I found, again, on the internet, researching this. It was a fascinating research study where it illustrates, in fact, that gender-based pay disparity, but then pay disparity rolls into responsibility disparity, rolls into representation disparity. Much of this comes from the academic discipline of ladies and men at university, and we will come back to that again. But interestingly, findings over 3 decades, and in studies quoted from the United States by Jacob in 1996, from the Netherlands, Kalman and Vanderlippe in 1997, from Russia, Gerber and Schaefer in 2004, United Kingdom and Germany by Machin and Puhani in 2003. All of these studies illustrate that the fields of study accounted for 20 to 45% of the wage gap, so the gender-based pay disparity, which again is a logical and start of the disparity that then rolls through the higher levels of responsibility. Now, interestingly, we have also Board Watch, so Boards Forum. If you're interested in the link, Boards Forum is an organization that was founded by 2 of my London Business School fellow alumnus, Eileen Hervane. And Eileen is a Norwegian lady who was really at the start of the initiative for the 40% quota in Norway that has now been hugely implemented. And she now runs a Board Watch initiative in the UK. We have the McKinsey Women's Forum initiative, Women Matter. But if you're in corporate life, you know that if you're looking to justify big-ticket projects or business cases or opportunity assessments, Goldman Sachs is very, very compelling. Okay? If you've got a McKinsey report and you've got Goldman Sachs that says it's a good idea, then your board is probably going to go for it. And although we have Credit Suisse and we have Egon Zehnder, it would be nice to see a Goldman Sachs definitive view on corporate governance. Or gender diversity in corporate governance. So that's something to put on the list. So indeed, hard data is important. Then we have to say what's going on in the pipeline. And here, in a study that's already dated 2011, we see that in the FTSE, so the Financial Times Stock Exchange listings of 350 largest companies in the United Kingdom, virtually, so 4 out of 350 chair women, almost none. 46% of the companies had exclusively male boards, and fewer women board directors in the mid-sized companies than in the larger companies. So just more evidence of what's going on. But this one I liked the best. This was evidence from Catalyst. One of the things that you see when you're researching this topic is that the finance profile is predominant in the nomination of women onto boards. I don't know whether it leads necessarily to good corporate governance, but at least in European companies, the majority of people on boards, and in the United Kingdom, the vast majority of people on boards are former finance directors. So if all these nominations are going to finance directors, then we have to look and say, well, what does it take to become a finance director? Well, typically in Anglo-Saxon societies, to become a finance director, you have to be a chartered accountant. So Catalyst had a look in 2011 to say, okay, how many women are there in the accounting profession? And here they found, remarkably, that 49% of all auditors, accountants, and investment professionals in Canada are women, that 61% of accountants and auditors in the United States are women. And then let's see how that transposes into partners in accounting firms. So in 2011, you had 50% of newly hired accounting graduates were women, this is in the US. 40% of all certified public accountants were women. Now we start to shrink. 21% of the partners in the firms were women, in spite of 45% of all the employees being women. Now, I asked myself, looking at this is really absolutely hard data of a systemic bias. Okay. You don't really need much more than this. I suppose catalysts might have to carry on this study over how many years, Nelson? We need 3 years, 5 years, 7. But we could probably go back historically. They probably have the evidence historically. And given that the US is such a litigious country, I asked myself, how long will it take for a class action suit by former women in the profession to sue for discrimination? Because here you pretty much have evidence, and you have it by firms where you can see that in spite of 44% of employees, only 18% are equity partners, and that ratio is pretty much the same right across the Big Four. So, again, more transparency, more reflection, and more action. But we don't want to be too strident, because it's always a challenge for ladies when we start to ask the hard questions. The gentlemen find it difficult. And we have to give them the time to come on board. So persuasion is a nicer way to go about it than force. And as was mentioned by Vivian, Vivian has had the initiative in the European Union on the table for a while. In fact, all of her ideas started with an invitation. She actually extended an invitation to the chairman of the largest companies, the largest publicly quoted companies in Europe. And she gave them 1 year. She said, okay, I invite you to come and see me and tell me what you will do voluntarily, and I give you 1 year. And guess what she got? A big 0. Okay, they did nothing. I think she, as the way this works in Brussels, she invites them for lunch, they come to Brussels, they have a chat, they understand what's going on, and they go away. Now, sometimes if they want to engage, they will engage, but here she got very little engagement. And so that is, in fact, what led us to, effectively, a self-formation which was driven by Vivian's department. So members of the European Commission saw the opportunity to bring the business schools into the debate, because the business schools are the source of the raw material, okay, the MBAs and the qualified people, to bring that together with GTWN. GTWN is the Global Telecom Women's Network, an organization that I am very proud to have been a part of for the past 20 years. That was a self-formation of ladies who principally felt lonely at big telecoms events because there were so few of us and an opportunity for us to bring them together. We had very good sponsorship from McKinsey in Brussels, and then a few lady board members. And out of all of this, we created the Global Board Ready Women List. And so we now have hard data, we have persuasion, and we have a pipeline. And so literally from an idea, as I mentioned, that we were working out on the back of an envelope over coffee in a hotel in Brussels in November 2011, we now have 8,000 ladies from all across the world on a LinkedIn-sponsored website, and we have, importantly also, partnerships with the executive search community. Now, in addition to that, in the period that we are speaking, we have seen national initiatives. So in the same way you have the independent women directors here in Turkey, we have in many of the European countries, and in Belgium, where I live, we have an initiative called Women on Board, which is the body to promote gender diversity in Belgian corporate governance. And on the 5th of December, if any of you are interested, you're most welcome to come to Brussels, because we will have the first meeting of the European Women on Board, so bringing all the national federations together. So now looking at GDRW in Turkey, so every lady in this room is invited to become a member. It's very easy. You go on to LinkedIn and you type in Global Board Ready Women, and you will find the links. They're on the previous page. You submit your candidacy and you are vetted. Now, in addition to that, and this is also a very, very critical piece of the equation, is the executive search community. Because now, as the boards start to become more professional in their nomination process, they start to work with the executive search community. And with absolutely no offense to the executive search members who may be here in the room, executive search as a profession also has a challenge because they do not always avail themselves of all the possible talent that could be on the table. And that is in part an issue of dealing with their client, because if you're a headhunter, an executive search executive, and you're dealing with the chairman of a heavily industrialized engineering company who happens to be 65 and does not have a mother who worked and does not have a wife who worked and maybe never thought about his daughter becoming an engineer, it's still very difficult because we do understand society fundamentally through our own personal experiences. And until our leadership cadre in all of these companies start to actually personally experience women in professional roles around them in their day-to-day existence, they will not necessarily say to the headhunter, I want a woman, unless they're obliged to, under the penalty that may come after the fact that they've missed the deadline in 2020. Okay. Now, the wonderful coincidence is that the GDRW and the Association of Executive Search Consultants globally will be here in Istanbul in 1 week's time. Yes? Not in this hotel, but in another hotel, in the Swiss hotel. And it's going to be an afternoon event. And so, again, everybody has the opportunity to go along and mix with headhunters who are all going to be looking for ladies like you. So, good luck. Go and find yourself some mandates. Now, I could not properly do this presentation without a little bit of a personal touch. So the photo there is the photo of my daughter's field hockey team at her school in Brussels. And this is because filling the pipeline is not only about MBA ladies, it's not only about accountants, it's also about getting girls into science, technology, engineering, and maths. And this is a very challenging thing to do, because even still today, teachers, math teachers, physics teachers don't think about girls. And I just had this experience literally yesterday. I went to the school and we had the teacher-parent interviews. All the math teachers were men, science teachers were ladies, but all the math teachers and physics teachers were guys. And, you know, the way they think about women is not necessarily where it needs to be. So gender stereotypes are still very much there. One of the other findings that have come out of the studies is that it would help to get more humanities undergraduate students into MBA programs. So, you know, you have a lot of engineers who naturally go into MBAs, but we need to see more humanities backgrounds into MBA programs. And then, of course, traineeships, getting young women, particularly between the 12 and 15-year age group, exposed to the companies is very important. Almost at the end. However, just as another personal illustration that things are starting to change, and this is a photo of my 31-year-old stepdaughter, who is a civil servant in France, like too many people in France. The country has too many civil servants. But the good news is that in her mid-career intake, master's in public administration, 28 students, 14 women, and 14 men. And there wasn't even a question that it would be anything else. So this is what parity looks like. So we had the Icelandic government, okay, in 2011, that is no longer there, but we have the future leadership Canada of France, and given what's going to happen in the French public sector, there are going to have to be layoffs in the public sector. Many of these people you see on this screen will probably move from the public sector into the private sector in their career paths, and they will do that with the experience of gender parity in their professional training. So I'm also a proponent of as much noise as possible. I don't think that any publicity is bad publicity, so the more that this topic is discussed by people who are for or against or haven't yet decided, the better, and so we want to keep it on the agenda and in the press as much as possible. And then, what will it look like? It will look like society. And so this is the board of Women on Board in Belgium, and as you will see, it looks a little bit unbalanced because we only have 3 men and 5 women, but it will look more like society than many of these decision-making bodies look today. And with that, thank you.